Peace, my people. You're tuning into I Must Be Bugging, where Black, gifted, and otherwise neurodivergent folks celebrate our special flavors. If you've ever questioned your perspective in a world built for the masses, welcome home. I'm your host, Sheldon Gay, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey as a late-identified Black, gifted man. Together, we'll rewrite the script on neurodiversity by celebrating our differences, challenging the status quo, and breaking free from old narratives that label us as deficient. In each episode, we'll explore the stories, experiences, and of course the curiosities of Black gifted adults and other neurodivergent people who are underrepresented or unidentified in a world where normal can also mean harmful. So continue with me on this journey of self-discovery, voices. Another episode of I Must Be Buggin'. This is your host, Sheldon Gay. I am so excited, as always, to join with you all, and certainly to have a very special guest with us today. I am a 41, almost 42-year-old Black man. I have, kind of a little bit of a goatee tuft and a mustache. I'm sitting here with my headphones, my over-ear headphones. And so again, today we have a very special guest, someone that I've enjoyed speaking with every time that I've had an opportunity, Hester, and I'm going to share his place for us to learn and just, like I said, vibe. And so today I'm laughing because I was asking him give these, detailed, elaborate, especially those, have accomplished a couple things, and you can kind of dig into those real deep, and let me just share with you what my brother shared with me. Dr. Dave Hester is an irrational human being learning to be rational. He joined LifeGuides as an executive because their missions to positively impact 1 billion people in the next 15 years matched his. He's just a dude. And we are complete. Beautiful. So welcome to the podcast. And again, I don't know if I should call you Dave, Dr. Hester. How do you want to be referred?
We're partying right now. This is chill time. So it's Dave all day.
Okay. Dave, thank you, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that description. I don't think I've ever heard anything like that before as far as a description. So I'm going to do my description too. And fantastic job in the bio. Like, this is my brand new favorite bio. I want to put it on all my sites and other media pieces. But like Sheldon, I am a 40-something. I have to do the math. I'm 41. Yeah. Woo-hoo. All right. I am 41-year-old Black man. I am currently wearing a gold knitted cap over my locks, which grows in a very unique way. You'd have to see a picture of me to really get it. It kind of grows to like a Dragon Ball Z Scouter. It's kind of on the side of my my face. I've got this kind of mangled and dangly beard with mixed in silver lines in it, which my daughter says sometimes makes me look unapproachable, like I know too much, like I just have a whole bunch of wisdom, which I don't. And I'm glad that she points that out to me so I can, kind of face my own internal bias if I do have that. Also wearing a pair of True Dark screen protector kind of glasses because I like everybody else, if anybody's listening, you're probably looking at a screen. So take care of your eyes. And I do it on purpose because it helps me sleep. And I'm wearing, one of my friend made a shirt called Easy, just always be easy. So shout out to Easy. And yeah, love that description.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Again, for those who cannot tell, I'm smiling big because I'm just so excited to have this conversation. But let's just kind of start at the beginning, as it were. Why don't you tell us, some more about yourself, your work, and whether or not you identify as neurodivergent?
Absolutely. So my work has been with, a range of people, including children and adults with autism, with neurocognitive diseases, also people who are experiencing neurological delays and learning delays. And my work has really just been around healing and supporting people in a world that's not necessarily built for them. So
Mm-hmm.
let's just call it what it is. I grew up in a world that wasn't necessarily built for me in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do have privilege, we can talk about that another time. But
Yeah.
I did. I came up. I was a military kid. I don't use the term brat because my mom called me that. She's right. So I was a military kid, and I moved around a lot, and you know, my family was the first to really acknowledge that things were a challenge for me in school. Um,
Mm.
like I said, the system wasn't designed for me. I grew up neurodivergent, dyscalculated, meaning I see you see nines, I see sixes, and that really
Mm.
sucks if you're trying to get a high score on an SAT, so that you can go on
Yeah.
and do your dream. And
Mm-hmm.
I also have severe dyslexia, which can get kind of quirky, which is I guess kind of filters into a little bit of my personality. And I spent a majority of my early education actually working on a way to get out of special education, which
Mm.
quick story on that. And I love telling the story because it's fun and it's true. I was in high school and, in my special education classes continuing after I transitioned from middle school or secondary school or primary, excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting my UK and British
Right. Right.
terminology mixed up.
Right.
But when I noticed that everybody was switching classes, and I wasn't, I was a
Mm.
little ticked off at that. I was like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
switch
Mm-hmm.
classes. I
Right.
want to
Right.
have that high school experience. I've seen TV and movies, and so I went to my parents and I said, "Hey, I want to take myself off of this track and go into Gen Pop." While we kind of use similar terminology for prisons as we do for school.
You're
So anyway,
right. Right.
I was like, "Yeah, I want to go into Gen Pop," and my parents were like, "Hey, if you want to do it, we got you. We'll get you the
Mm-hmm.
tools. We'll get you counseling. We'll get you glasses because I had visual impairment on top
Mm-hmm.
of a speech impediment. So it was a lot of
Mm.
things,
You
and
had a
they were
lot of
just
fun
like
going on.
a lot of fun. And nothing ever stopped me because my parents said, "Just go do it." And
Mm-hmm.
so with that, I graduated. Took some honors classes, worked my way to get into college. Um, and so that's a little bit about my work, a little bit about myself and how I do identify as
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent. But I love what you're doing with this community and reframing it as gifted because I have no doubt that my upbringing, my experience contributed to my gift,
Mm-hmm.
and that being creativity and just my meditation research, my
Mm-hmm.
connections to contemplative practices and bringing them to a larger audience. It all plays a role.
Yeah, no, I love that and thank you for sharing that. I don't think we had talked about excuse me, like the dyscalculia or the dyslexia before. Um, maybe not explicitly, but I just know again how all these pieces come together. Um, and at least what I'll say, what's interesting to me is understanding or knowing these things early because and knowing things early and having people who support you through that journey. Not everybody's experience is that way, and I think that can have, or I know, or I believe. Let me say it that way. Let me be fair. I believe, right, that has a major impact on what folks can end up, doing later, and not necessarily feeling um all of the trauma. Not that there's not necessarily any trauma, because as you said, like we go out into this world that's not built for us, right? And so there's some challenges around that, but there's a lot of trauma that I know people are talking about that is simply like in their home, right? Like what did I feel like in my home? Amongst my family, those that I cared about most, how did I perceive how did they help me see myself um in those ways? And so hearing you talk a little bit about, you know, it is funny to say, Gen Pop, like, being, removed from that particular special ed class and not having somebody say, "You sure about that?" did you want to hold off, right? Like, no, like, okay, let's get you the tools, let's get you what you need. We figured out together, right? Like that to me is super special. Um, you know, for me, there are aspects of neurodivergence that are certainly gifts. Like I think we all have those times where we're kind of like, it doesn't feel as much of a gift, right? It's like what's inside this package, right? But at the same time, I think that, the beauty of it all, when we can kind of do some healing and do some, work around it, we can see those things where it's like, oh, this lets me see the world in a way that other people can't. This lets me do things. This gives me compassion or empathy around things that other people really struggle with, right? And so, yeah, man, like I said, thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
So tell me, tell me, were there any hurdles with you getting started kind of in the work that you were doing? I guess, like, how did you even get into, like, I guess that's kind of a question too. It's like, once you left schooling, like, how did you find your way to where you are now?
I had this discussion earlier with a potential partner, and I'll tell you exactly what I told them was, I'm a combination of the people who came before me, meaning the people who explored, my ancestors, my parents, my environment that I grew up in, and my lifestyle that I live. So what that translates to, what people can directly connect to, is, let's say, media, for example. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, everything from Asimov all the way now, to the writers of things like Black Mirror, and I'm a fan of cinema and how it kind of creates story. Even though I know story had, we can get into a different discussion about how we should all challenge our own internal story, because but that's a different story. Yeah, there's that word again. So there's that word again. So going back, all of that kind of helped to fuel who I am. As far as my connection to technology, I've always been fascinated. The first thing that I wanted to be was a mad scientist. Now, this is interesting to stay on wax, because people are going to be like, "What the hell?" But not like mad, like, "Oh my God, he's going to hurt people." But I was interested in people like the scientist of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Just why someone is driven to create things. So I was more thinking about the why. And so with all of that, after schooling, I kind of started to continue to look at what my father kind of calls high weirdness. He called, sometimes I'm the king of high weirdness. And he says, hey, you're really into that science and spiritual stuff, and, what is now considered STEAM, because I include art in there. Art's really important. And he's like, hey, go do that. My father was just like, go do that. At the time, I wasn't doing what I had originally planned. Life takes turns. My original path was to law school, and it was paved with gold bars. And I mean gold bars. Like I had connections. I had, people signing off. I had it basically laid out for me. Which again, that's me also talking about my privilege. This doesn't mean that I grew up, in a wealthy family. I had people who believed in me, who created ways. So this turn, I hit some hurdles. One of them being, I started to really get into learning more about the brain. I was like, why do we think the way we do? Why was this story, which was a story 50 years ago, now reality? And I'm talking specifically about things like Star Trek. We talk about the phones we carry. That was a story by Ray Bradbury years ago that he thought of. And then it's reality. Somebody else took his idea in a good way, brought it to fruition. How did they do that? Right. So getting into the neurosciences, I didn't have a computational background. I didn't have the strong understandings of neural networks and even just the biology of the human brain. I didn't have that because I wasn't necessarily on that path. So there were hurdles there. But what helped me in those hurdles is just knowing it's cool to not know everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool just to be like, you know what? I have no flipping idea what you're talking about when you mention the prefrontal cortex or these random terms that are thrown out all the time. That's cool, but I'd
Yeah.
like to learn. I want to learn.
Yeah.
And so when I had those hurdles, then there's also the hurdles of licensure, on the therapy side, and the hurdles of how do I push forward? Like how do I grow? How do I scale? So there's always going to be hurdles, and I just kind of look at them like I'm a runner. It's like I just got to get over it, but I'm going to the finish line, and even when I'm done at the finish line, it just starts a new race.
Yeah. My gosh. I love it. First of all, this is kind of banging a gong that's just in my life right now around, I'll say self-awareness.
Okay, say more.
One of the things that I'm early next year going to probably, or probably maybe by the time people hear this, it might already be early 2024, but regardless, right? Early 2024, my plan is to actually do a series talking about self-awareness, because one of the things that, you spoke to that I think is really like transformational in one's life is the awareness of that story, which a lot of us don't even we don't even realize is there, right? We just know this is my life. And then when life is kind of trying to teach us a lesson or kind of reveal that story to us, we're very confused because again, our framework is that story. But then when we have something that lets us see it and say, oh, wait, I've been telling myself all these different things about how the world works, who I am in that world, and all these other different things, I can change that story. And in the process, change my life. Even some of the very things in front of me need not change. If I change, a lot of my relationship with them will change. And that
absolutely
is so, so powerful. And so I loved you talking about that. And one of the key things to that, excuse me, that you also spoke to is that curiosity, right? Is that willingness to say, I don't know, but you know what? Tell me more. I was having a conversation, or I was on Reddit today a little bit, and it was interesting because I actually made a post. I was on Reddit doing some other stuff, but I made a post, and one of the things I was just talking about was this phenomenon around, um, minds that quickly grasp stuff, and how sometimes that can seem kind of odd to people, and people even going back to what you were talking about, right? It was about here. Let me I'm kind of being a little bit maybe abstract about it, but basically my post was
I'm following.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I'm clear for everybody. Is I made a post. I was saying, for quote unquote gifted minds, right? There's this thing called skip thinking, where a lot of us will be able to very quickly discern what's happening with the concept or just some pattern or whatever it is. And it's not that we took 15 steps to get there. It's like we skipped from step 1 or 2 right to the end. And that phenomenon can throw people off. And sometimes there's two things that come out of that. One, for other people it may look like you just jump to a conclusion, right? And when I say jump to a conclusion, I mean you're making a judgment as opposed to, oh, I know, I see all the wires connecting, right? And that can be a challenge because, you very quickly say, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. This is what's going on. And people are like, well, how could you possibly, you couldn't possibly, right? How could you possibly do that, right? And so, finding peace around that and realizing, okay, this is going to be a common phenomenon for me, right? I need to make, again, my story. What's my story? Is my story that everybody, is out to get me, or is it that other people experience this differently? And it may not be fun for me, right, for them to experience that differently. But if I recognize that now, I don't have to have a certain type of reaction to their experience. But it was the other thing that came out of this discussion was funny, and going back to this curiosity, was that there were a lot of people in the chat that were jumping to conclusions. I was replying.
It's like they're doing exactly what
exactly. I'm like, so you don't even know what this term is right here, and you've already written all this stuff. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Right.
So it's got to go back and forth. How are you?
Right. Exactly.
Have you come to that conclusion?
Exactly. So, but I just think that curiosity is so powerful, and it's one of the key ways in which you can recognize how self-aware, or at least your potential for being self-aware, is how curious you are. When somebody shares something with you, are you kind of like, that's not me, or, I don't believe that, or whatever? Are you like, well, tell me, what do you mean by that? Right? Like that thing it opens up a door. You may not still end up agreeing with them or whatever, right? But like, if you don't even have the curiosity, you're likely blocking your blessing, as they say, right? And so,
you're not just blocking your. I mean, I don't want to stop you and say you're not just.
No.
You're blocking your blessing, and you're also disconnecting yourself. This is going to sound kind of esoteric, woo-woo. Follow me for a minute, people.
No, go ahead.
You're disconnecting yourself from source, meaning the source of whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Like you're disconnecting, and I find it when I discovered that it's great for me in disagreements. It's great for me when I am agreeing with someone to ask them. They say, "Hey, I think your thing's not going to work, or your idea is not going to work." Well, tell me why. Why do you believe that? And and then I've given up on wanting and almost holding on to being in charge of somebody else's emotions or how somebody else processes it. Like if someone else says, I don't get it, I don't like what you do, tell me more. And they tell me, well, thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. But then I'm not going to beat myself up like, I've got to turn this one person and I've got to make them know. Like I haven't been in a Twitter spat in so long that I'm not even on the platform. That's how long because that's how long I just don't do it, because you need long form conversation, and we need more time to be curious about others, because we don't know everything.
I love that too, because I'll say, one of the things I did notice is that, and I'll be honest, I'm not 100% there. Part of that is because I'm, as a late identified, gifted Black man, it meant that I've got 41 years of a story that was missing insight, like critical insight into what was going on. And so I'm unlearning a lot of that stuff. But even before this sort of realization earlier this year, I know that a couple of years ago, I realized, Sheldon, you're, going back and forth with people on Facebook and Twitter or whatever. And why? Like, how is this really serving you? Like, sure, maybe you've, proven your point. Okay. But like, how are you feeling? Right? Like, again, how is that helping you connect to the source? Like, how is that helping you? And if it's not, let it go. And there's been plenty of times where somebody has said something and I've just looked at my phone, or I'm like, on my computer, and I'm like, 2-3 years ago, we would have been at it. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah, you'd have got this work, right? But now I'm like, okay. And I put the phone back down, or I move on to something else, right? And yeah, man, I mean, I just think, like, I loved the fact that you talk about, how it blocks you from the source. Because for me, I'm vibing. I'm on the same wavelength, right? I think that ultimately that's how a lot of stuff should be judged, is how well does it connect us to that source? Because that's really what we're, in my mind, that's what all this, I call it the simulation, right? This is what the simulation is about how do I, find my connection and maintain and strengthen my connection there, and not turn myself away or cut myself off. And that takes a lot of work, and it's a lot of painful work, but it's worth it. At least I'm telling myself that, right? So,
right. I mean, but that helps a little bit.
Yeah, right. But I just, like I said, I love, like I said, that reference to, like I said, getting back to the source, because it is so important that we recognize that that's sort of the underlying goal, I guess is the way of saying it. I don't want. If you had something else,
I do real quick.
More. Okay, go ahead.
What specifically about tapping into the source? Because if I were me, 15 years ago, listening to this now, I would say, "What the hell are you talking about with source?"
Go. Okay.
And inshallah, you want things to work.
Yeah,
you want things to work. You want to be connected to whatever, and this may be your spiritual tradition. And I just invoked a little bit of I have a interesting spiritual history.
Okay.
I've been called everything as a spiritual hag. There's another word that they use, but we'll use hag because kids may be listening. But because I studied everything and not just studied, like I dove deep into Sufi. My family is intertwined with Catholicism and the teachings of Islam, but then also like Jewish principles. It's very fun. It's fun to have so many intertwining things in a family. Even all the way, and I'm going to be naming a lot of religions. German Lutheran, and then the people who I'm connecting with when I'm traveling, learning about Hinduism and the Sikh people, and those are people who believe. You may be agnostic. Talking about whoever is maybe listening, you may not. You may be completely antagonistic towards organized religion, which is okay. That's okay too. You still have a belief system, and there is still a source, a collective. And the science proves it. There's a collective unconscious. That's why they are working on metadata to understand human behavior, because there is a source that we are all connecting to. And this simulation, you mentioned simulation, and I'm going to touch a little bit on it because Robert Sapolsky at Stanford he recently dropped a book talking about free will. And, some of his arguments, I not necessarily agree with some of them. Okay, sure. They're plausible based on the biological sciences. One of the interesting things I pulled from the book was that when we're talking about source, we're talking about connecting with that higher self, or that thing that connects us to each other. And typically when we're arguing these small, minute, minuscule other M words that mean small, we are just all we're doing is cutting we're cutting atoms. That's what we're doing. We're cutting atoms because we are a greater set together. I talk to my son about this. My son's also gifted, and I say, "Hey, son, 9 years ago, most of your cells regenerated, or or changed. You're a different person, but you're a collection. You're a collection of viruses. You're a collection of bacteria. If someone were to try to clone you right now, they may think the you is actually a mixture of hundreds of thousands of different viruses and bacteria. So maybe they may be like, oh, this guy's a bacteria. It's like, no, it's because we're all connected. And so when you connect with source, that's why meditation is so cool, because you're breathing with your body. You're acknowledging your body. I do this fun thing in meditation, and I kind of joke like, I'm a god. Follow me, people. This is not slanderous or all that stuff. But
sacrilegious, right?
Sacrilegious or nothing like that. But you have a body with trillions of cells. I mean, you have trillions of just talking about neurons, and you have that's just in your brain. There's also neurons in your gut. That's why you get gut feelings. All of those and neurons are basically cells. So I imagine sometimes that I'm talking to them, and I'm like, "Hey, cells, thanks for replicating properly. For those of you who are trying to stay too long talking about cancer, please exit. Please go ahead and leave. But thank you for being here. Thank you for collecting and communicating with me. And that's what I mean by source. There's so many meanings. So anyways, I wanted to add that there's so many meanings of source.
Yeah, no, we could have a whole podcast episode about that. But thank you so much for sharing that. Again, I 100% agree with you. And I mean, again, I'm not trying to kind of like get I'm not trying to necessarily stay on this point or necessarily even get into the series that I'm planning, but one of the pieces that you just mentioned that came to mind was just understanding metacognition and understanding that it's not just this like sort of base level of conscious thought. There's so much more going on with us that we're not aware of necessarily readily, but when you sit down and you do become more aware of that through meditation, through whatever method you choose, prayer, whatever it is, right? You see, like you said, that higher power. And I mean that in both ways. I mean that if you believe in some sort of deity level, but I also mean it from a perspective of, I thought I had X level of power, but there's this higher, X plus whatever, right, level of power that is within me. And so, this is, again, I already knew from the jump that this was going to be an amazing conversation. And I know we're kind of like just vibing on life stuff, but I do want to, because I really, you talked about it, you bothered to mention it right in your like intro. I do want to talk a little bit about your work at LifeGuides. And so can you tell us a little bit more about that and like how it even might be relevant to, neurodivergent people in the workplace?
Absolutely. So LifeGuides is a peer-to-peer learning platform. One of my things I talked about early on is I like to learn. And so that led me to join an organization that is built specifically for that. It started out first as a service for people who were caregivers of elderly with Alzheimer's. So it was a way for you to connect with someone and say, hey, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? What was your experience? How did you do self-care? And LifeGuides is, connected to organizations around the country who are purposefully providing this as a service to their employees because they care. And, let's call it what it is. They also want to get a good ROI. And the ROI isn't always monetary. Sometimes the ROI is if my employees are not only happier, but they're more productive and they are taken care of as far as their basic needs and their psychological needs and mental fitness needs, they can innovate more. They can create more. They can, take our business and then maybe even create their own business and take it to the next level. So, I started with LifeGuides after being a part of the largest Black-owned therapy organization in Seattle called Good Intentions Counseling. Wonderful CEO there, Phil Carr, who kind of helped me on my clinical journey. And when I was coming from Good Intentions, I was like, man, how do we scale compassion? How do we scale empathy?
Yes,
how do we scale knowledge? And so I was doing actually a DE&I keynote at a conference, and the CEO, the founder of LifeGuides, Mark, was like, hey, you seem like you're pretty cool, doing some cool things. And I was like, yeah, I think so.
Right.
And we had a chat and we talked about how can we scale and help as many people as possible. And I knew from what I was doing, I was making an impact, a couple thousand here or there. Of course, direct counseling is one-on-one, so there's only a finite amount of people you could serve.
Absolutely.
And I've always worked with neurodivergent people in different places in their life, and as well as in the workplace. Like at Good Intentions, for example, that organization does this wonderful thing where they will go with clients to their job to help them acclimate, and help them create a higher level of living. And that's such a wonderful thing that I wasn't even aware of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So where LifeGuides helps specifically with neurodivergent people is if you are a parent of a neurodivergent child, but I'm going to take the NG out and say of a gifted child. If you are a parent and you want to help someone, you want to connect with someone who's been through what you've been through, who understands what you are experiencing. And for organizations, that's huge because one of their biggest challenges is, let's say you're my manager and I come to you and I say, hey, my son has, he's got autism and a few other funny A words, and I need help. I need help to not get triggered when he's non-responsive because he needs functional communication. And if you, my manager, are like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, right.
Where am I going to go? I mean, there are other communities, but where LifeGuides helps is I would connect directly with someone who's been through that lived experience. And then they have a conversation, and it's so much more accessible than therapy, but it's more qualified than just talking to a friend. Yeah. Because we have strict vetting practices. They're HIPAA trained. They're trained in not only nonviolent communication, but how to de-escalate conflict. And so this helps in workplaces because people leaders. And I had to say that slowly because when I say it fast, when I start to get it into my, Northeastern fast talk, people are like, did you say people eater? And I said, no, I didn't say one eye, one horn, flying purple people eater. Yes, I'm for the people. I said people leaders. They need that because individuals rarely leave organizations because the organization just sucks. Most of the time, they're leaving because their manager, their leader, I hate to use this term, their boss isn't there for them as a full human being. We want everybody to leave everything at the door and come in and do your work. There's an interesting show about that entire premise called Severance on Apple TV, where you split your conscience. I just watched it. Like, mind you, it's been out for years, I believe.
Oh yeah, okay.
And I was like, or maybe 2 years, I don't know. But I was like, I'm not watching it. Blah blah. And then someone said, but here's the thing: they split consciousness. So one of your consciousness is at work, and the other one lives its life. And I was like, that's a funny concept. That's an interesting concept because that's what some organizations want.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It just doesn't help with our humanity.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that you had me just thinking about a couple of different things. I mean, one thing I'll say, again, hopefully I don't have to go back to the corporate space, at least not in a traditional sense. But I know that a lot of the tension that was there for me was around exactly what you're talking about. One, again, you go into a workplace where right, we just show up as Black people, period. There's that whole layer, right? But then we show up also, we have the audacity to show up, right, as gifted and otherwise neurodivergent people. And that adds, a whole another level of complexity in the expectation. The story that we tell around the job is you come here to push out widgets and you can go and do the rest of that stuff right elsewhere. But it's like, I'm actually a full human, right? And that means that when I come here, I might be able to focus a majority of my thoughts or whatever, right? My actions on this thing, but that I can't squeeze out the rest. And if I try to, it's going to have negative impacts. And you don't actually want that. If you want me to be operating at my full level, you don't, there's a difference between, do you want somebody, whatever, on the phone with their kids all day, right? Like that's an extreme, right? But at the same time, do you want to have a space where if something comes up with someone's kid, that they're not stressing about how it's going to look if they've got to go to the school to deal with something, or if they've got to go take care of them, right? Or if there is something going on with them at school that, maybe doesn't call for them to go that day. But again, like, I go home, my child has autism, and my interactions with them, my relationship with them impacts my psyche. And again, there's no way to completely disentangle that from myself, and I'm bringing that to work. Oh, well, there's support for me to be able to navigate around that, right? Like that's going to help me now. I feel much more safe at work. I feel much more empowered at work. I'm going to do a number of great things. The retention is going to be higher, particularly in those kinds of environments. Like Where
Yeah.
else am I going to find this? And I'll say, the last place that I did work, there were some challenges, not necessarily trying to get to all that, but I'll just say that one of the things I will say is that, kind of just there was a lot of flexibility around how we work. So if you
Hmm.
did need to take the afternoon to go do something for your kid or whatever, like, sure, like that's fine. Like nobody, unless whatever, there was like a big meeting or whatever that, was just that day. I don't know, whatever. Right. But generally speaking, if you needed to say, I'm not starting work until 10 because I take my kids to work and then
Yeah.
whatever. Okay, fine. Right. Just get the job done. And if you need something, let folks know. And that's kind of it. But a lot of cultures, a lot of work cultures, again, going back to the kind of the collective story of capitalism, right, is
Call it what it is.
right, exactly, right, is something very, very different and very unhealthy. And so I love that, LifeGuides is kind of trying to disrupt that narrative and disrupt that pattern for folks. Because the reality is, right, as long as we live in a capitalistic society, like we've got to find ways to navigate it. And this sounds like a great opportunity for folks to do that with. And particularly, I'll just say, I like that you said it was more accessible than a therapist, because there are some people, as soon as you say therapist, right, like cross it off the list, right? But if
Yeah.
you have
Oh
somebody
yeah.
that right, you have somebody that you could talk to, and it's like, oh, okay, and they're more than just some guy off the street. Okay, let me see what this is about, right? So yeah, man. I mean, I'm digging it. I think. Were you going to say something else about that?
Yeah. I was just
Or
gonna
yeah,
say. I was just gonna
yeah.
add that it's also destigmatizing support,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got to destigmatize it. We
Mm-hmm.
are we are running on medieval, and I know I just talked about religion earlier, so this is kind of knocking my previous thought. I'm going to call it what it is before anybody else does.
Right.
But we are running on medieval dogma. We are
Mm-hmm.
running on a 100-year-old process. We are running on terms and language that is typically created by the people who benefit the most from creating that
Mm-hmm.
language. And
Mm-hmm.
so right now we have to change when like you said, when people hear therapist, they're like, ooh. Even sometimes when I talk to people and they ask what I do, and I say, I typically tell them everyone the same thing. It matters on the day. And
Right.
then they're
Right.
like,
Right.
well, what do you mean? And then when I get to when they usually pick a day, and then if they pick a day and that day is the day I do therapy, and I say, oh, I'm a therapist, they start to get kind of, and I'm like, listen, I do not want to work when I'm off the clock, so I'm not gonna therapize. I've been called everything. Don't. I'm not gonna therapize you. I'm not
Right.
gonna. I'm not gonna. Diagnose you or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I can still care for you and hold a space for you if that's what you need in the moment. And when I say it to people, they say, "Oh, that makes me feel like there's no stigma around. Like
Mm.
there's no. Oh, I'm talking to someone. I need help, so therefore I'm broken." Newsflash, everybody, we're all broken. We're human beings. It kind of comes with the territory. So find what puts you together.
Okay, I've got you here. I got to ask you this, because this is a really interesting thing. Because not only do you know, I people have told me. I mean, I talk about it, but people have, particularly in the last few months, have told me that I've got this. I would say this empathy gift, right? And it can be hard sometimes, because you show up in places, and sometimes people even ask, like, kind of, can you give me some insight into what's going on? And you're like, now, if I tell you kind of like what I'm seeing, are you going to shoot the messenger here? Because I've had, right? Like, and I don't want that. I'm trying to, you asked me, I'm trying to help you, right? So I guess my question is, particularly, like I said, not only do you have that, but you have the training. How do you navigate that where you're, in these relationships with people? And again, relationships not necessarily being romantic, but just like I said, friendships, whatever,
Mm-hmm,
family
mm-hmm.
members, whatever it is. And they're looking for, or they're saying that they want help, right? They want insight into why is the world basically, right, so messed up? Why can't, how do you navigate those conversations while, to make them feel safe, but also kind of still giving them something meaningful that's not just kind of placating their story, I guess is a way of saying it.
Yeah. I mean, this is a wonderful question, isn't it? And there's so many layers to it. I want to kind of do a quick overview of the layers that I'm seeing immediately. One of them is assessment. And I know that's more clinical to say assessment. But when I say assessment, I mean ask questions. Are you looking for advice? Are you looking for a kind of curated critique? Or are you looking to just be heard? And that's an assessment in itself. Seeing, is this person in a place where they can receive what I'm going to tell them? Because it might ruffle some feathers if I tell you what's going on. And then believing them. Meaning, if someone is saying, "Oh, I just want to be heard," and sometimes there's that healer that's like, "Man, I gotta tell you. If I don't tell you this, you're going to fall off the edge."
Right.
But it's okay. It's okay to let people go on their own journey. It's okay to only offer when you've been asked to offer it. So that's one part of the layer. Another part of the layer, other than assessment, is this is like assessment B, is understanding their worldview. You talked about how everyone sees the world. And we did this wonderful test. I'm so sorry I can't remember the name of it. But if you look up worldview psych test, it's available free. I believe it was at UPenn, I think. And it was an eye-opener into how everyone in my family has a different worldview. Someone sees the world as scary and unsafe. Others see it as it's a fun, sunny day. Everyone sees things differently. And we have to adjust to where people are, you know what I mean? Without losing yourself. The third piece is understanding your individual capacity. Because as an empath, as someone who is highly sensitive, I've been in situations where I'm just like, everybody can get love and space and time. And then I'm like, blah.
I was going to say, yep, exactly, 100%. Yep.
Oh my gosh. And it's not because, some people look at the superficial and they're saying, oh, well, that's because you're holding people's secrets. And it's like, there's actually, studies showing that you feel better when you're holding people's secrets than when you don't. And that's an interesting study because it's talking about how if you're holding a secret, like for somebody's like birthday or something like that, you feel good. You kind of feel happy. There's a boost in mood. But that's different, I believe, than you're holding someone's deep secret that is harmful, traumatic, or even that they're scared of. So when it comes to navigating it, I always encourage people, assess where they are, assess where you are, help where you can, know when to stop, know how to check your own bias and your own perspective. Because I'm a victim of this all the time. That's why I'm learning to be rational. I'll be talking to my wife and I'll be like, hey, babe, that makes zero sense. And then it's like, I'm being insensitive there because I think I know the right answer. But when I've had we do experiments with each other where we withdraw support to see if the other one can make it. And when I say she did this one task without my support, and I told her, and she said, thank you. Allowing me to do it in that moment helped. She said, but also you talking about me, being empathetic and wanting to help me, and also being vulnerable. Empathy is also sometimes about being vulnerable and dipping below the surface because I let her know why I wanted to do it. She said that helps. So that's kind of a, service for that question.
Right. No. That's really, really helpful. And I think, it's just really helpful because I think particularly the closer that the folks are to us, right, the more that we feel that love energy, the harder it is to see them on that edge, right? Fumbling around like, am I getting there? And, you're like, dude, like you're on the edge, like back up. And you're like, sometimes they've got to kind of stick that foot out and feel like, oh, wait, there's nothing there. And like hopefully pull themselves back. Where sometimes,
Yep.
they've got to figure out how to fly, on their way down, as it were, right? Like that seems kind of, crude, but at the end of the day, right? Like people, like you said, people have to be allowed to walk their journey, and, kind of go from there. And there's even times, where, and I'll talk about me. I won't necessarily talk about other people, but I also am trying to make sure that I'm being aware of the times when someone did let me, fall, as it were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And realize that wasn't necessarily a lack of care, right? It wasn't that they didn't care about me or that they were looking forward to me falling, and not hold them responsible for it, right? And that is a key, part of it as well, because sometimes it can feel like, wait, I'm down here with a broken arm and leg and you didn't let me, it's like, so, so yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to say about that, but thank you for sharing that. I think that'll be helpful for folks.
I hope it's helpful. And I hope one other thing to be helpful is to say, challenge your perspective on people, meaning some people look at other people and they'll say, "What?" Like you said, why didn't you help me? I'm falling. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you do something? And then we sometimes project onto them. I needed help. I was abandoned, so I'm going to put something on you. And challenge that perspective sometimes. We give other people a lot more power than I think they have.
Well, y'all, we had to stop somewhere, and this is where we stop for now. Well, thank you for joining us for part 1 of this conversation. As you can see, Dave and I had an amazing conversation, and I thought this was a good stopping point for that conversation to kind of make things more digestible for folks. As you can see, when I bring guests on, it's a very free-flowing conversation more than a traditional interview. And I hope that works for you all, even for those who that format may be more challenging. Regardless, I'm hoping that everyone's looking forward to part 2. I know I'm looking forward to sharing it. We start further discussing, what it means to understand how we think, how life comes with inherent risks in all things. And so how do we choose our happiness? We talk a little bit about the patriarchy and the privilege that men are afforded, even as Black men, and so much more, right? So, again, hope you enjoyed part 1. Thank you for joining us, and please look out for part 2. It'll be coming up pretty quickly. All right? Thanks. Thank you for joining me for another episode of I Must Be BUGN. I hope you've learned something, became curious, and most importantly, felt affirmed by what you heard. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing compassionate narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. Don't forget to connect with me on IG at I Must Be BUGN, where I'm eager to see you share your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Leave a review and subscribe. It helps others who are eager for community find our people. So thank you again for being a part of the I Must Be BUGN community. I can't wait for the next episode. Until then, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. And remember, you're not bugging, you're brilliant.